The idea of Albertan independence first became public in the 1970s. Its initial public expression is often tied to 1974, when a group of Calgary-based citizens formed the Independent Alberta Association. This was largely a response due to growing frustrations with federal policies under Pierre Trudeau, particularly his pursuit of bilingualism, multiculturalism, and the National Energy Program. Now it's 2025, and for very similar reasons, we have this movement growing again. Let's look at Jeff Rath's video that has gained nearly 10 million views on Twitter and as well has been retweeted by Elon Musk.
Statehood.
Well, there's a group of Albertans that are working together right now to put together a delegation to go to Washington to talk to the Trump administration about Alberta petitioning for U.S. statehood. It's quite evident that we're being governed by idiots in Ottawa who don't understand that we can't afford a trade war with our largest trading partner. And rather than simply apologizing to President Trump for not meeting our NATO commitment to not adequately securing our border, apparently the Trudeau government has decided to declare a trade war and run up trillions of dollars in costs like they did during COVID on a made-up emergency. So there's a number of us in Alberta that have had enough and want to go speak with the Trump administration about the benefits of Alberta joining the United States.
Due to the mass publicity that video that we just watched gained, I reached out to Mr. Rath, and he was kind enough to sit down with me for an interview. Mr. Rath, welcome to the MCGA channel. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm excellent. You are causing quite the stir online lately.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. Yeah, no, it's interesting for sure.
It sure is. I want to start off with briefly just reading your Substack that you wrote on this, which I found pretty interesting and insightful. Never forget that Trudeau provoked the current trade war with the United States. His diagnosable grandiose narcissism required him to fly by government jet to Mar-a-Lago without a clue or plan, simply because he can't stand not being the center of attention. When President Trump suggested that Canada was being subsidized by the US to the tune of $200 billion a year, Trudeau rolled over like a submissive puppy and started whining about how tariffs would bring an end to Canada as a country. As diplomacy went, Trudeau might just as well have dropped to a knee to serenade the president with a rousing rendition of "Our land is your land." And then you also wrote, which I thought is damn well accurate, what he should have said was, "President Trump, we hear and respect your frustration. Canada is almost 100% behind on NATO defense spending. The growth of Canadian exports of affordable oil and gas to the US to help you keep gasoline prices down has created a trade imbalance. We intend to address it. We will be back to you with a plan that will include massive increases in Canada's military, drug enforcement, border protection spending to simultaneously resolve the border crisis, trade imbalance, and NATO spending issues." Couldn't agree with that anymore. Real briefly, for the audience who might not really be paying attention as much as they ought to have, I'd like to go through the series of events, if I may, with you that led us to this point. Okay. So November 25th, Trump threatens with tariffs, and then Trudeau flies down, as we read there, on November 29th. Trump asked him why we have a deficit. Trudeau said he didn't know, and which is just crazy for the prime minister to be able to say that. And then Trudeau said that we didn't know. Trump said that we should be a state. And then the following day on Truth Social, Trump puts out, "It was a very productive meeting with Governor Justin Trudeau of Canada at Mar-a-Lago. We discussed many issues, et cetera, et cetera." So that's where the Governor Trudeau starts happening. It's quite the timeline we got. But then on December 2nd, rather, Trudeau bashes Trump publicly, which, if anyone knows how to deal with Trump, it's not the way to do it. And then we get on the 10th of December, Trump doubling down, calling him the governor again, saying looks forward to continue speaking about this. And then we move down to the orders of Trump's tariffs on the 1st of February, and then a response from Trudeau on the 3rd of February, where he does secure a 30-day pause. And then Trump had tweeted about that favorably. And then we move forward where Trudeau 7 days later bashes Trump again publicly. Again, I don't know what you expect. You have good faith discussions behind the scenes, bad faith in public. And then we get March 3rd, March 3rd, again, Trudeau condemns Trump publicly, saying that his actions we're in good faith, called him a bully. And then March 4th, we get the 25% tariffs again, essentially declaring a trade war. Yesterday, we got March 5th with Trudeau criticizing Trump again publicly. It's an absolute mess. And I just want to real quick get your idea of that timeline of events. Do I have that roughly correct in your mind?
Oh, I mean, as far as it goes, but I mean, it's clear from the outset that Trudeau has been trying to provoke this. All he had to do in Mar-a-Lago when there was any suggestion whatsoever of tariffs was, simply say, look, Donald, that's not going to be good for either one of our countries. Tell us exactly what we need to do, and we're going to fix whatever the problem is. Instead, Trudeau, again, rolls over and just starts whining about the fact that, oh my God, it'll be an end of our country and you can't do that, blah, 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 blah. Rather than just constructively, just say, okay, I hear you, that's a position. So you need to tell me what we can do to avoid this, because this is going to be really harmful to everybody. Right? Trudeau didn't do that. As far as I know, he's never asked specifically what needs to be done. He's come up with a bunch of half-baked, half-assed statements as to what they're going to do, including this claim that he was going to somehow surge 10,000 people to the Canadian border. And of course, any of us that have been around the military, knew that this was some sort of joke, because we don't have 10,000 available combat troops that we can surge anywhere currently in the Canadian Army, let alone to defend the Canadian border. So, and I was actually discussing this with a good friend of mine who's a former retired lieutenant colonel who understands these issues better than most. And he said, yeah, Jeff, like where does Trudeau think he's going to get the 10,000 troops from? I said, no. I said, you're missing what he said. He said personnel. And I think in this so-called personnel, he's already discussing, counting existing, donut-eating border guards and customs agents and, all the rest of it, right? So, I said he's not really doing anything new. He might be hiring another 1,500, Canadian customs and border agents, whatever. But this is not what's expected. And so on. And I mean, as you read further in that Substack, and again, I'd commend it to people that want to, look it up and read it. A quick way to find my Substacks now is my Substack team thoughtfully set up a website for me. It's called AlbertaStatehood.com. So that's capital A Alberta, capital S statehood.com. And, it takes you directly to links to my Substack. And we've been posting recent media reports and interviews and so on. And that one's in there, and it's entitled Little Justin Trudeau Starts a Tariff War. And what you find in that document is we put out a 13-point plan that I drafted in consultation with Lieutenant Colonel retired David Redmond, who's the former director of Emergency Management Services and was actually in charge of helping to secure the Canadian border during the 9/11 crisis. On behalf of Alberta as the head of Alberta Emergency Management. So, he's an actual expert in the area of border security and so on. And between David and I, we came up with what we thought was a fairly reasonable 13-point plan to A, secure the border, B, solve the perennial issue of Canada's gross underfunding of our NATO commitment, which is a violation, as far as I'm concerned, of an international defense treaty, which completely undermines any claim to Canadian sovereignty. And then finally would also address the trade imbalance that President Trump was concerned about with regard to the flow of goods across the American-Canadian border. And what we were suggesting in that regard was, instead of committing $40 billion to electric choo-choo trains to run between Toronto and Montreal, all Trudeau had to do was immediately commit $40 or $50 billion to the purchase of American military equipment that's sorely needed in Canada: armored personnel carriers, modern armored personnel carriers, modern helicopters, Apaches, Blackhawks, surveillance drones, attack drones, and other equipment that would be, very useful in patrolling and defending the Canadian border. And it would have been, not even a twofer, it would have been a threefer. I mean, we would have solved the NATO, we would have solved the NATO spending crisis, which is a crisis. When a sovereign nation is not funding its own defense in accordance with its international commitments, that's a crisis of sovereignty. right?
Makes
So it would have solved that problem. It would have solved the problem of of border security. It would have solved the trade imbalance problem. And then we made some other suggestions, which some of which were picked up, by Pierre Poilievre. And I know for a fact that document was forwarded to Pierre Poilievre through contacts that I know him.
Okay.
And the only useful thing that he took out of it was that we should have life in prison for fentanyl dealers, and pretty much ignored all the rest of it. Because even Pierre Poilievre, and I don't know why he's like this, he's kind of like liberal light, will not commit when elected to immediately resolving the NATO spending crisis that has been caused by Canada perennially underfunding its NATO commitments. It would be very easy to do. I mean, we would expect a conservative government to come in and doge the civil service that Trudeau put in place, fire 50% of the civil servants that have been that have been hired under the Trudeau regime, bloating the federal bureaucracy beyond any reasonable measure. Sacking half of the civil service, and just simply applying that money to our NATO commitments. But again, this is what boggles my mind. No, we're not going to meet our international defense obligations, and we're going to continue to operate as a military protectorate of the United States of America, right? Well, thumbing our nose at President Trump and saying, yeah, we're not going to fund border security, but we're going to build a choo-choo train between Toronto and Montreal, right? Like, we're going to build an electric choo-choo train. Like, this is the level of leadership that we have in this country. Choo-choo trains are not, electric choo-choo trains are not a priority. Making sure our international defense commitments are met should be the number one priority of any federal government. And I think I've written, it was in another Substack, that the number one social service priority of any national government should be the defense of the nation. National defense is a social service. It's the most important social service.
Yeah.
And, as my friend David Redmond often writes in all of the articles that he starts out with, he quotes an anonymous ancient Greek philosopher who stated, every country has an army, either theirs or someone else's, right?
Well,
and it's absolutely true. And then I said, to bring it into a much more modern context, quoting, a philosopher that, that I've read extensively as a political science student, and who I think, has a lot of wise advice for our present, class of feckless leaders. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote as early as, the 1500s, about how the Florentines had been so easily conquered by the Lombards. His comment was, and the Florentines were easily conquered because they had become weak and effeminate from long peace. And I mean, and if that doesn't describe the current state of Canada's military, I don't know what is. We have a female chief of defense staff who's more worried about having tampons in the men's infantry barracks than she is about going to cabinet and screaming and yelling about the fact that they continue to underfund their NATO treaty obligations, which has turned into a crisis of national sovereignty and a crisis of national defense. Because if we're violating the NATO treaty, how is it, if anything would ever happen, that Canada was attacked and wanted to invoke Article 5, that we would be able to rely on a treaty that we continually thumb our nose at and violate by not meeting, the basic requirement? And to put things into context in terms of, how small, a requirement this is in the context of the Canadian federal budget, the Canadian bureaucracy, 2% of Canada's GDP, 23-24, worked out to would have been about $43 billion is what we were required to spend. We barely spent 20, right? And we've been doing this year after year after year after year. Well, Trudeau continues to waste, piss money to the wind on programs like CERB, like all of the ridiculous COVID spending. I don't even want to think about how many billions of dollars have gone to various friends of Trudeau and various patronage contracts, subsidies of bug protein factories, battery plants for batteries that are never going to be used because President Trump, thankfully, has pulled the U.S. out of those stupid Paris Climate Accords, so that all these batteries that are being made in Ontario are going to have no cars to put them in. I guess that is unless, the Liberals or Pierre Poilievre is liberal light, is going to start putting trillions or hundreds of billions into subsidizing building electric car plants to use the batteries that nobody wants to build cars that nobody wants. I mean, this is what's going on in our country. And people wonder why university-educated Albertans are fed up and want to leave Canada and just say, look, and we're not even leaving Canada. Canada left us.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, the day that Trudeau declared martial law against my fellow Albertans because they didn't like the smell of their diesel trucks in Ottawa, where they're peacefully protesting violations of our rights as citizens, as far as I'm concerned, Canada left me.
Yeah.
I'm, at that point, I guess I'm not Canadian anymore. I'm some sort of political prisoner in my own country. And, and here we go. And I mean, and at the time, keep in mind, and I think it's probably because I have some sort of oppositional defiance disorder, but I didn't need to talk to all the doctors and experts and all the rest of it that were telling me that the COVID vaccines were dangerous and that they're going to cause blood clots, or that alternatively myocarditis or various forms of inflammatory, syndromes, or capillary leak syndrome, or all of these other things that they've been proven to do. All I needed to know that the vaccine was bad for me is that Justin Trudeau told me that I had to take it. Right? At that point, I knew, by definition, that somehow or other that this vaccine was horrible for me, because if Justin Trudeau thought it was a good idea, how the hell could it be a good idea? It was a very simple analysis for me. And again, we see the same thing with what's going on, with this stupid tariff war that Trudeau started. And what really concerns me is that all of the, the messaging operations and all the PSYOP operations that were going on during COVID, are now back in full swing. And even the premier of my province is again being captured, right?
Yeah.
By all of this craziness, and is holding hands with Justin Trudeau, as opposed to being able to maintain her position as the responsible adult in the room, saying, like, everybody needs to relax here. We need to deal with things appropriately. Being belligerent and threatening war on the United States by cutting off the power to the Northeast and crashing the Northeast power grid, is not the answer. We all need to, just take a deep breath, step back, engage in, discussion. I heard on the radio today that today is the first time that Trudeau ever specifically asked Donald Trump what he could do to satisfy President Trump such that the tariffs could be lifted. The tariffs are in place, 30 days of fake posturing and fake measures. He put, I heard today on another program that the so-called fentanyl czar, wasn't somebody from military or somebody from policing or somebody like, Lieutenant Colonel Redmond, who, has knowledge as to how border security should work. No. It's, a deputy minister out of the Trudeau government who's a Trudeau crony, who's effectively a patronage appointment, who's being put in charge of the number one issue for President Trump in terms of ensuring that no more Americans are killed by an illegally manufactured product that's pure poison, and that as a Canadian government, they should be taking every measure to eradicate. I lost track of how many of my friends' children ended up in hospital or were killed during the pandemic because they thought they were taking, some sort of harmless recreational drug. Turns out it's laced with fentanyl, and they've died of an overdose. An accidental fentanyl poisoning. Yeah. This is going on in Canada every single day. Yet, Trudeau, in typical Trudeau fashion, dismisses this as a concern. Exempts British Columbia from the Narcotics Control Act so that they can have their own, legalized heroin dealership program where, the former deputy chief medical officers of health can become wealthy. Importing kilos of heroin every year for distribution, to the addicts of British Columbia at a profit. Of course, we don't call them addicts anymore. We just call them people with needs. Yeah. As if they're just a market that needs to be satisfied, or some sort of, normal group of, social service clients that, don't need treatment, don't need help. We'll just keep feeding the drugs and feeding their habit without any thought to rehabilitation, because now we have, former medical officers of health that have a vested interest in continuing to supply them with heroin.
They make
I
money.
mean, this is the state of Canada, as it is today, and it's no wonder that President Trump is ready to pull his hair out. Like, it's absolutely ludicrous that this is the way that we're being governed, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that this is why, Albertans from every walk of life, farmers, ranchers, tradespeople, people working in the oil field, people, from right across the province, people, with multiple university degrees, are fed up and want the hell out of Canada. Like, we don't want a part of it anymore. Like, it's embarrassing to be associated with that level of stupidity.
It truly is.
On the regular basis. It's almost impossible, and I haven't been traveling much, but I mean, it's very hard for anybody who's Canadian now to travel internationally with any pride whatsoever, because it's embarrassing to be a Canadian. I feel sorry for my my fellow former Canadian, or I feel sorry for Canadians, because this is what they have to live with now. And this is why I really identify now as an Albertan, and I really don't identify as a Canadian anymore, because, like I said, the country left me years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and what a shame that is. And what's even worse is how many people would say what you're saying is insane and are completely jumping to the side of Trudeau and believing that what he's been doing is correct and he's been dealing with this right, and we got to unify, and Canada's not for sale, and we got to posture even though we have literally no footing and nowhere to stand on any of the posturing that we do. It's incredible how many people are brainwashed and can't.
No, but again, look at what they're doing, right? So Jagmeet's saying, "Oh no, we can't call an election. We can't have a vote of non-confidence until we take care of the worker. Oh, the worker has to be taken care of." Yeah. So they're literally going to piss away another 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 billion dollars, if not another $1 trillion, on so-called enhanced UI benefits. Yeah. So the whole CERB of universal basic income, didn't completely take, and they couldn't keep it going. So, in advance of another election, much like they did with CERB and all the so-called emergency spending from COVID, let's have another big money giveaway where every 20-year-old who lives with their parents and doesn't need the money is going to be given, nice checks that they don't give to their parents for rent or heat or fuel or whatever it is, right? So that they can go out and empty every Canadian Tire store in Canada of paddle boards, kayaks, bicycles, recreational equipment, so that they can have another awesome summer paid for by Justin Trudeau in advance of the next election, where the Liberals are going to be seeking a majority funded by Alberta. I mean, this is what's going on, and unfortunately, in Alberta, we have a premier that's surrounded by Kenny cabinet ministers that were sucked in the last time, that were directly responsible for Kenny being thrown out as the leader the last time, advising Danielle Smith to hold hands with Trudeau and Poilievre and all the rest of them and be united in our stupid belligerence towards the United States, our largest trading partner, where the only thing that we need to do is to say, President Trump, you're sorry. We're sorry. You are right.
Yep. And
please tell us immediately what to do to fix it, and we will fix it immediately. Right. And in good faith, here's $50 billion in escrow that we're moving into an account to buy U.S. Military equipment to rebuild our armed forces and meet our NATO commitment. How hard is that to do? And the $50 billion on military equipment is a drop in the bucket compared to what Trudeau and Singh are ready to piss away through the entire economy, driving inflation through the roof again.
Or the $20 billion they sent to the Ukraine for not our war. You know what I mean? Like,
well, or the $9 billion that they spend in foreign aid every year to promote intersectionality and LGBTQ rights in Ghana or wherever.
Or telling people not to poop on the beach in Ghana, even
whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous that as an Albertan, that I am being forced to be governed by this level of stupidity.
And it's crazy that there's not people of your intellect, with your knowledge, and the people that you're talking to, like that general that you spoke with, that's working with you on this plan, the 13 points, that aren't running things in our country. And
to be clear, the person I was speaking to is a retired lieutenant colonel.
Pardon me, sorry.
Right? Yeah, but that's fine. But that having been said, like, there's not, I have 2 honors degrees. I have an honors degree in political science from the University of Alberta, and I have an honors degree in law from the London School of Economics, University
Should have
of
been a
London.
drama teacher,
right? Well, exactly. And I've got a drama school dropout, right? Because I don't even think it's clear that he finished drama school, right? Running the country. And again, the only reason I bring up my degrees is nothing that I'm saying is anything that anybody that, in Alberta with a trades degree, a trade certificate, a grade 12 diploma, working in construction in Alberta, working on the rigs, working with their hands, contributing to the Alberta economy, doesn't agree with or isn't saying that aren't saying themselves. I mean, this is, the only people I should say the only people, there are obviously some others, but the vast majority of people that disagree with this viewpoint and disagree with Alberta statehood are all the ones that benefit from the graft and corruption of the present socialist government in Ottawa. So, obviously a good number of the academics who are being paid to combat misinformation online, all those people. No. It's like, we can't have Alberta as an independent country and end up and have our positions doged and not get money from, Trudeau anymore to support vaccinating pregnant women when there's no safety studies for the vaccines. Yeah. We can't stop being funded for promoting vaccines in children that Pfizer itself admitted we're going to put 34 children per million into hospital with myocarditis. Oh, no. We can't stop being paid for that. No. We can't have Alberta become an independent country. Common sense might prevail and we'll all be out of work. Right? Those are the people that are opposed to this, right? All the civil service unions, obviously all the federal government employees.
Just 25% of the country.
Well, and I mean that's the other issue that we have, right? Like, one of the problems with Canada right now. So let's say we have a third of the country, being below the age of 18, so children still in school, so not part of the workforce. We have an aging population and a growing aging population, and then we have the third in the middle, maybe 15% kids, 15% seniors, so 30% of the population, is either too young or too old to work. And then in the middle, we have 60%. Well, of that 60%, we're now at a point in Canada where it's between 25 and 30% of all Canadians are employed by some level of government. So municipal, federal, or provincial. So you really only have in Canada about a third of the population engaged in active, productive work outside of government where they pay real taxes. Because don't tell me, and I have a brother who works for CRA, and you can't. I told him one time, I said, you can't tell me that there's any point to a federal government worker or any provincial government or municipal government worker paying taxes. Like all you're doing is taking money to the government to give it to an employee to give it back to the government. Like it's not real money. It's not real tax dollars. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly like it just all we need to do with government workers is here's your salary. You work tax free. We're not going to waste any time taking off deductions. This is your salary. You don't pay taxes. You're not a taxpayer because you're largely a drain on society, right? Like you're an expense. You're in the expense column. You're not in the revenue generation column, right?
You're money out. You're not money in.
Yeah, no, that's right. So and of course people get really offended when people say things like that, but from the standpoint of economics, it's purely true, right? And of course, heaven forbid that anybody would ever actually discuss economics in the context of a discussion pertaining to national economy, which is exactly what we're dealing with right now. Yeah, I mean, people that don't understand basic math, right? The GDP, we'd be lucky if the annual GDP of Canada would touch 4 billion. I think we're somewhere near, 4 trillion. We're somewhere near 3.8 trillion, right? The GDP of the United States is almost 40 trillion. So they have 10 times the GDP we do. We're lucky to be able to trade into their markets, yet we're like this little mouse nibbling at somebody's ankle, biting them in the ankle, thinking that this makes any sense whatsoever, and that we're not just going to get kicked off the ankle and crushed underfoot. I mean, it's, at what point does any of this belligerence directed towards the United States make any sense other than as a purely foolish election ploy,
Yep.
By people like, well, Carney and Trudeau, or Trudeau handing off the reins of the World Economic Forum to Mark Carney, to continue the penetration, to use Klaus Schwab's words, of Canada by the World Economic Forum, and continue to use, continue to bleed Alberta taxpayers dry, for every World Economic Forum scheme that they can come up with. From battery plants to bug protein to you name it. But heaven forbid that it involves oil and gas, because we know that's dirty, right?
Yeah, of course. Even though we're the only country that has a carbon tax, and by offsetting our oil, we're importing it from dictatorships when we have it on our own ground. And then people again come to the point where they wonder, why does Alberta want to secede? And you can only have that question in your mind if you don't critically think about the situation whatsoever. And actually, that does lead me to ask you, because you're in it, you're over in Alberta, what is the sentiment like? To me, it seems positive. What's the sentiment like to your discussion?
No, I think the sentiment's really positive. I mean, my phone's been ringing off the hook for the last 2 days. And I mean, the expressions of support that I've been receiving have been overwhelming. Yeah. I jokingly told somebody that the ratio of positive to support to death threats is about 20 to 1.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good in Canada.
Yeah, no, I think so too. No, it's overwhelming, and we're working forward with our project, to get our delegation to Ottawa to Washington. Yeah. And that's all working very well. We're in contact with members of the administration. We're proceeding forward in a way that we think makes sense, on a timeline that we we think makes sense. We want to be methodical. We want to be professional in our approach. We know that there's a lot of questions and concerns that Albertans would have, either with regard to Alberta independence with an economic union with the United States, Alberta independence as a territory of the United States, Alberta independence as a state of the United States. So we want to make sure that we've captured, all of the various questions and concerns of our fellow citizens, so that those can be addressed, while we're in Washington and meetings with Washington, and have the appropriate and obtain the appropriate answers. I mean, like, one of the big concerns is, there's a lot of citizens of Alberta that are, on the verge of retirement. They're going to be on fixed incomes. I mean, one of the big concerns is what's going to happen to our pensions. And, are we going to lose our Canada pension? Is there going to be a replacement Alberta pension? What's going to happen when Alberta leaves Canada and the Canadian dollar starts trading on par with the Polish zloty, which is what will happen when Alberta and its oil reserves leave Canadian Federation. We need answers to all of those questions, and obviously assurances from the United States that pensions and savings can be converted. Canadian dollars of Alberta residents can be converted at par into U.S. dollars, and things like that would certainly go a long way towards sweetening the pot with regard to any potential referendum.
Yeah,
and of course, and then the other thing is putting together, is gauging the level of support, from Washington for what we're proposing. We're assuming, that they'll be, that the support will be overwhelmingly positive. Obviously, we were very gratified today to see that Elon Musk agrees with me that Alberta statehood, is a laudable goal that we should be pursuing. So I was pleased to have the shout out from somebody as close to President Trump as Elon Musk today. So we were grateful for that. But we're continuing to move forward, and we're doing this in a methodical manner. We're doing it in a professional manner. We want to get the message out to citizens of Alberta. None of this is a done deal. Yeah. There's not. There's a democratic process that has to be followed. The first step in the process, in accordance with the Quebec Secession Act, is that there has to be a referendum in Alberta on a clear question. Which we think is fairly easily is a requirement that's fairly easily met. Obviously, we're either going to have to obtain the support of the Smith government for a referendum, or we're going to have to initiate a citizens referendum. In that regard, given that Jason Kenney drafted that legislation in a manner to make it very difficult, if not impossible, to meet the conditions of it, we may be reaching out to Mr. Musk for his capital T, capital E, capital C, capital H tech support. To get to borrow some of his 20-year-old wizards to come up and help us with software and help us with expediting the gathering of pre-gathering of signatures and identification of Alberta citizens that would be prepared to sign the referendum petition within the 90-day period to trigger the required referendum. And then of course we're looking forward to a robust public debate where we can explain, I personally think the advantages of Alberta leaving Canada are pretty self-explanatory. No federal income tax, no GST, no carbon tax, no federal excise tax, no Justin Trudeau, no Mark Carney, right?
Yeah.
No more people in Ontario and Quebec figuring out how they can cook their books to keep $30 billion a year of Alberta tax revenue, themselves, or alternatively another so-called tax, have-not provinces, or shovel it into various patronage schemes of them and all of their all of their buddies in Quebec and Ontario, again at the expense of Alberta. I think those are pretty strong reasons to vote no. I mean, or to vote. Yeah. I'm sorry, to vote yes, yeah. And to get out of Canada. I mean, just the federal income tax thing alone, I think would be something that most business people would be very interested in hearing about, and especially looking at the actual math on what an Alberta budget would look like with all of the tax revenue that leaves the province that never comes back staying in Alberta. There's a lot of us that are of the view, and we're some people are working on the numbers right now, but we're somewhere between Alberta as an independent nation state being able to operate quite well annually with a flat 10% income tax, or 10 to 15% income tax, flat 10 to 15% corporate tax, and no other taxes.
That's an
which would make that would make us one of the lowest. No carbon tax, no GST, et cetera, et cetera. All of that would be gone. No excise taxes, so the price of gasoline at the pump, no carbon tax. The price of gasoline at the pump would drop in half, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those are all things that Albertans need to, consider in terms of, do you want to vote for paying twice as much as you should for gasoline? Do you want to vote for paying 3 times as much as you should in income tax? You want to vote for paying, a good chunk of your salary now in carbon tax? Do you want to vote, are those things that you support that you want to do? Or do you want to be rid of all that and vote yes and move forward into the future with, at least a 30% increase in your disposable income?
When you make the argument, it's hard. I mean, what beyond pride in country, which as eroding, as you've said, it rather quick. I mean, there isn't really what substantial argument is there on the no, right?
Well, that's the whole thing. You go, oh well, we don't want American healthcare. Well, you don't have to have American healthcare. We already have healthcare in Alberta. And there's no reason that any of that would change. We don't need to change our healthcare system, to become a U.S. territory or a U.S. state. Would there be people that say, hey, maybe we should consider, making a private option fully available for those Albertans that, don't want to wait 6 months for a hip, and make, and allow the Mayo Clinic to come and operate in Alberta, where people could buy private insurance to have access to a more robust healthcare system than the one that's provided, by the public. Certainly, why not? That's effectively how things work in the United Kingdom. You've got the NIH and you have the private systems working side by side, and there's no reason that we couldn't have that in the Republic of Alberta. It shouldn't be anything that frightens people. This isn't something that should terrify people. I think in the long run, it would alleviate emergency room waits, and this whole stupid idea that you can't get into a hospital by a referral from a physician, that you have to wait in an emergency room for Nurse Ratchet to see you and make sure it's okay for you to get help. Is something that's become a bit of a problem in Alberta, in terms of, people being sent home from emergency rooms, allegedly with nothing wrong with them, and they die 8 hours later. I mean, that's been happening in our province. People being sent home from emergency rooms with appendixes that rupture, on and on and on. I mean, that's, these are common everyday occurrences in the present healthcare system in Alberta. Certainly we can make that better. And we shouldn't be frightened about a conversation as to how we can make it better.
I agree fully that you shouldn't be frightened. And it's almost like it's really just too used to what they know. At least speaking for people out here, that I mean, you break it down, even the pro stay Canada argument kind of dissolves itself in as you utter it. Right? You're mentioning the sentiment's been very positive. Very only 1 in 20 is death threats that you've been getting, and the arguments you've been making are. I mean, as an Ontarian, I don't know the ins and outs of Alberta, of course, but I have always sympathized with the position of Albertans, given how much money is spent, how we quite literally just take advantage of the province of Alberta. And again, it kind of comes back down to how could people even be surprised that this is happening? And you had mentioned and touched on the reception in the United States has been fairly positive from the folks that you've interacted with. I wanted to kind of jump back though, as far as that timeline is concerned that you brought up. What timeline are you working with now that the message has been sent and so many millions have seen it?
Oh, I would imagine it'd be within weeks. Like so we're moving ahead as quickly as we can. I think you correctly identified that this whole project has kind of started snowballing on us. But obviously the sooner the better to maintain the momentum, and and quite frankly to keep the pressure up on the Alberta government. I personally think that if the Alberta government wanted to exhibit true leadership, the Alberta government would would reach out to the Trump administration and say, look, we understand that there's an expression of interest from your administration for pursuing Alberta statehood. It's something that we're interested in discussing. We have a number of questions that need to be answered. Our citizens have a number of questions that need to be answered. And in order to do that, we need to do that in a calm, tariff-free environment. So, what we would suggest is that as the government of Alberta, we will commit to calling a referendum on Alberta independence, which would be the first step towards, being able to discuss a more robust union with the United States in some form. Because we have to get out from underneath the Canadian diplomatic umbrella. So and before we can do that, we need to ask our citizens whether or not this is something that they want to do.
Yes.
And to do that, we have to have a referendum. We've scheduled one 6 months from now.
Really?
And, no. I'm just saying this is what what I'd like the government to do, is exhibiting true leadership, and then just say, so that we can have this conversation in a calm environment. Can you please lift all tariffs on Alberta oil and agriculture so that Albertans will not be, focused on, the economic ruin that's being brought on them by idiots in Ottawa and Toronto, and so that we can have a discussion in a calm, threat-free, tariff-free environment. And we'll commit to having a referendum in 6 months and asking Albertans how they feel about declaring themselves an independent state. With a view to either staying as an independent republic, joining the United States as a territory, joining the United States as a state. We're prepared to take the first step, which is to ask Albertans the question. Let's have a referendum, and people can fight it out. And quite frankly, the referendum question could be, do you want to independence from Canada as a standalone nation state? As a territory of the United States, as a state of the United States, or do you want to stay in Canada, continue to pay federal tax, income tax, or federal income tax, GST, carbon tax, excise tax, and continue to send $30 billion of your tax dollars every year to the rest of Canada so that they can look down their noses at you and sneer at your dirty oil and dirty diesel trucks and complain about the fact that that you're making the fuel that delivers their groceries. Is that what you want to do, or do you think that it's time that we put all of that childish stupidity aside and stand on our own 2 feet as independent Albertans, right? So and I don't see why why our politicians in Edmonton are so afraid of asking Albertans that question. Unless, of course, it's because they're afraid of the answer, right? And I suspect that's what's going on. And again, when I see when I see some of the things coming out of the current Smith cabinet, which in effect are coming out of the former Kenney cabinet, because it's all the same cabinet ministers that basically blackmailed their way back into cabinet by threatening to bring down the government if Danielle didn't accord them the appropriate respect after she won the leadership, right? that's what we're dealing with. So, and again, I don't care what it takes in Alberta to have this happen. But if it takes, Albertans peacefully protesting at the Alberta legislature, demanding a referendum, writing the premier, writing all of their MLAs, demanding a referendum. But why that message, why that message isn't going to the Trump administration right now, it's incumbent on a group of private citizens affiliated with the Alberta Prosperity Project to put together a delegation of Albertans to go to Washington, to gauge Washington's, the Trump administration's appetite, for a more robust economic union with Alberta, and to bring those answers back to Alberta, as opposed to a delegation from the Alberta government, is beyond me. And to me, it demonstrates a complete lack of leadership on the part of the present Alberta government.
It's what it seems like. And I really do believe, based on all you're saying and what I interpret being the position of the United States at this time, that doing so, going down there, making these points publicly, is going to be a Pandora's box that can't be closed of Alberta's separation. If it's not,
well, I think I'm already at a point where I think it's inevitable.
Yeah,
right? Because
like
I don't know how my fellow Albertans, and at least at one point, I don't know if that's still true since since Trudeau has been flooding Alberta with countless new Canadians that were not welcomed in Quebec. But at one point recently, in recent history, I mean, Alberta literally had the largest number of university degrees per capita of any jurisdiction in North America, if not the world. Right? We're a very highly educated population. People are capable of thinking for themselves. There's no reason not to have a robust debate amongst the citizens of Alberta and let the people decide whether they want to stay in Canada or whether they want to leave. And I have a hard time believing, even amongst the people that are working for government, if they were told, listen, this is the plan. This is the new Alberta Constitution. We've constitutionalized a maximum flat tax rate that can be charged by an independent government of Alberta, either as an independent nation state or as a U.S. territory or U.S. state. This is the maximum taxes you're ever going to pay. There will be no GST. There will be no carbon tax. There will be no excise tax. Literally, your disposable income under this plan will increase 30%. I don't even think if you're a government worker, you would be voting against that.
I don't think so. I think you'll not only have an extraordinary amount of people in Alberta agree with it and vote for referendum, but you'll also likely get a flood of people from out east who share these values, who, see that golden opportunity. And that's another.
Well, obviously, that's one of the issues that we would have to be, discussing before that is, I think either prior to the referendum or shortly thereafter, I think Alberta is going to require some pretty stringent immigration controls.
Yeah,
but we'll see. There's lots of people that say, "I'm not an Alberta. I'm a Canadian." Well, there's lots of Canada for you to go back and live in.
We'll see.
We'll see. But I think I'll wager that there'll probably be a larger inflow into Alberta than there'll be an outflow. And for those people that don't want to live in Alberta and want to go live in the rest of Canada, the good news for them is that given that Alberta, will be trading in U.S. dollars, and that's likely to be the new currency of the independent Republic of Alberta, is the U.S. dollar. Whatever real estate or property they sell in Alberta when they leave, they can get paid out in U.S. dollars. And, and when they go to the rest of Canada, where, the value of the Canadian dollar is that of the Polish zloty, I'm sure that they could buy a much bigger house with their Alberta American dollars than the one they had in Alberta, and they're free to leave. Why not?
Sense. It really truly, I don't think people really understand how devastating that will be to our already embattled currency. Like we're at 15-year lows at this point. If we lose Alberta, Polish zloty, it sounds like where we're headed, right?
Well, yeah, and but again, all of this could have been avoided, by Trudeau and Carney. It could still be avoided. Albertans voted in a referendum to end transfer payments. So the Premier of Alberta has more than once publicly stated that she would respect the results of a referendum. Why doesn't she respect the results of the referendum to end transfer payments? Why isn't she taking every single step that she can to ensure that all the money that's raised in Alberta stays in Alberta? I think there's a pretty good argument for using Section 92(13) of the Canadian Constitution of 1867 to say property and civil rights in a province are the exclusive purview of the province. So Canada, you can assess tax rates federally, you have that jurisdiction, but Alberta will collect them. Because we'll pass legislation saying the federal tax collectors can't, seize, attach, or collect any property or money in Alberta, and henceforth all money will be collected by the government of Alberta, and we'll remit to Canada what we think is Canada's fair share of the tax dollars raised in the province of Alberta. And there's no reason not to. When you read the transfer payment provisions of the Constitution, they're aspirational. They're not mandatory. There's no reason for the amount of money to be leaving Alberta that's leaving Alberta and the way that it's leaving Alberta, other than that the government of Canada is now arbitrarily, without consultation, setting the transfer payment formulas without consultation with Alberta, or without reference to the purpose of transfer payments, which is simply to provide each province in Canada with a similar level of social services. So are you telling me that without the $30 billion a year that Alberta puts into the rest of the country, that Quebec and the Maritimes won't continue to have similar levels of social service to Alberta? They might have to run deficit budgets. They might have to, manage their affairs more respectfully. They might have to, tighten their belts a little bit, but they can still have similar levels to social services as we have in Alberta. Right now, Quebec has gold-plated social services compared to Alberta. They get a post-surplus budgets, and Alberta is still borrowing money to build our running deficits and borrowing money to build our roads and build our hospitals and pay our doctors and pay our nurses and all the rest of it. That's also what people would be voting against when they vote yes.
Yeah.
Is bringing an end to that foolishness.
Which is you borrowing your own money.
No, borrowing money because we have to, because we're, the federal government's taking all of our money away and giving it to Quebec.
Yeah.
Right.
In a roundabout way, borrowing your own money.
Well, no, we have to borrow it elsewhere. I'm sure that, if you tried to borrow $10 billion from Justin Trudeau, he'd say he doesn't have the money, and he's certainly not going to make it available to Alberta if it meant, it would come with so many conditions. If we were continuing to, produce oil beyond whatever cap him and the gibbering Chipot think we should be set, on Alberta carbon emissions, which is ludicrous.
It is ludicrous. We should be the richest nation on earth, if not one of the. Kuwait.
Well, certainly, if Alberta leaves Canada, we would instantly go from being, an embattled colony of Eastern Canada to being literally, at APP, we've looked at this, to the country in the world with the highest GDP per capita overnight, all just by voting yes.
Who's voting against that?
Well,
right? When you put it like that.
I'm sure there's quite a few of my fellow citizens that are still, quite attached to their Canadian passport and their Canadian identity.
Yeah.
And again, we're going to have a robust public debate, and we'll see, everybody can express their varying points of view, but other than I love my Canadian passport and I have relatives in Halifax, or whatever it is, I don't understand what this attachment is to, what is rapidly turning into a failed socialist state.
I think it's a yearning for times that are well past. I heard Jordan Peterson once say that most Canadians are about 7 years behind in their understanding of the goings on of their government. And it does seem like that's the case, where people think we are where we were, well, now maybe 10 years ago or further back, when we really aren't. As Trudeau said, we're a post-national state. We don't have an identity. So what identity are you clinging to if there is no identity? Right? We can't even call Toronto anymore. It's Toronto, the Anishinaabe, whatever the hell of the Mississippi River, right? It's incredible. We do land acknowledgements and state that we aren't supposed to be here when we start doing anything. So what are people hanging on to? There's really nothing to hang on to beyond the idea of Canada.
I hear you. I hear you. And again, but it's the hypocrisy of it. I mean, I always tell, as you're probably aware, I mean, I've spent a good chunk of my career um, uh, advocating for the treaty and Aboriginal rights of Canadian Indigenous people. And quite frankly, they've been hard done, and they've been they've been cheated and lied to over and over and over again. And to me, the land acknowledgements are just the final insult. I always tell all my Blackfoot friends, next time you're at a function with Jody Gondek and she acknowledges that she's on the territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, say, yeah, thank you very much. Can we please have Nose Hill Park back? Right? Like, why not? It's their land. Please just give it back to them. You're not using it. It's just a big open space in the middle of Calgary that people walk their dogs on. Why wouldn't you give it back to the Blackfoot Confederacy so that they could have an urban reserve in the center of Calgary? Right?
They don't actually mean it.
No, they don't mean it. That's what I mean. Like all of this, it's just lip service.
It's policy by projection.
And that's, and I want to speak to that too. Well, because again, the whole issue of Indigenous rights in the context of Alberta independence is a very, very important issue. Okay. And it has to be dealt with appropriately. It has to be dealt with respectfully. And what I would urge, people thinking about in the context of this is the new Alberta Constitution has to speak to the treaty and Aboriginal rights of Alberta's Indigenous people. But the remarkable thing about it is, when you look at what Ottawa spends annually on Indigenous people across the entire country, Alberta could then afford to enter into a meaningful resource revenue sharing agreement with Alberta, Indigenous nations, who, if we join the United States, would have the status of sovereign tribes, and certainly, the independent Republic of Alberta could afford that same recognition, and let all of them, develop their own casinos, develop their own, trading systems, and so on, without the supervision and interference of the government of Alberta. But on the basis that of the $30 billion that was formerly leaving the province of Alberta through resource revenue sharing, a meaningful portion of that would go to Alberta's Indigenous nations, far beyond anything that they're having to scrape out of Ottawa on an annual basis on bended knee, or through litigation, or through claim settlement processes and all the other mechanisms that that they currently have to struggle with to get to have the appropriate respect paid to them by Ottawa, because even Ottawa simply pays lip service to Indigenous rights in the same way as all of the civic and municipal and provincial politicians that sit there, and academics that sit there and mouth land acknowledgements without having any intention whatsoever to do anything to give Indigenous Canadians a fair share of their land back. Yeah. Right. It just, every time I hear somebody making a land acknowledgement, I'm offended. I'm probably offended for a lot of reasons different than a lot of other Canadians don't quite understand the depth of the history and abuses that have gone on and the fraud that's been perpetrated against Canadian Indigenous people. But I'm offended that we are also that these people are so hypocritical that they have the nerve to acknowledge Indigenous ownership of the land without taking meaningful steps to give it back. It boggles my mind. I just shake my head.
It's policy by projection, and it is completely lip service. There is no intent to give it back because there's no reasonable way to give it back.
But again, I think you and I could have a fairly robust debate about that on another day. But there's certainly ways to come to certainly much more fair and equitable accommodation, that has yet been reached by a purely hypocritical, bureaucracy in Ottawa. For sure.
I certainly agree. I meant more so the way that they put it out, the way that they say it. It's like the whole thing's got to give it back. We're going to give the whole thing back. We acknowledge it's yours. We shouldn't be here at all. All the names are wrong. We're colonial and we're bad, right? Like, they don't mean anything.
Yeah, and I think, I can't remember what case, that the Supreme Court said it in. The fact of the matter is, we're all here to stay. Yeah. We all have to find a way to, to accommodate one another. And first, Indigenous nations have legitimate interest in, having an ongoing, meaningful, access to revenue from their Aboriginal title lands that they still have an interest in under treaty. There's no two ways about that, right? That's obviously going to be one of the thorny bumps on the road, to the negotiation of Alberta sovereignty and independence. But it's one that we have to be prepared to address with clear eyes and we have to be able to deal with, fairly and equitably. And, of course, that's literally one of the reasons that I'm involved in this is I actually truly believe that the Indigenous nations of Alberta could get a far better deal out of an independent Alberta Republic than they've ever gotten from Ottawa.
It makes sense, at least on the face value. Now, with kind of going back to that independence movement and specifically the referendum, for folks that don't know at home, because I didn't actually know that you had a referendum, and I like to pride myself in being pretty well versed in what's going on in the day to day with our Canadian politics. But so you guys had a referendum to stop transfer payments that is not being honored by Danielle Smith, you're saying?
What's that? Yeah, well, not stopped by. It's just not be. There's just been no action taken since the Smith government has come to power.
Yeah.
I mean, the referendum, was done under the Kenney government. Kenney ignored it. You're right, because what else would you expect him to do? I mean, he was basically a Trudeau. When you look at how he behaved through COVID, he was basically a Trudeau liberal, and the grassroots of the party rose up and threw him out of office. The only problem is that all of his cabinet ministers that should have been thrown out of office with him have managed to creep their way back into the Alberta government cabinet. So we're basically, have the same people that were giving Kenney or supporting Kenney in the same horrible practices and advice, in and around Premier Smith, formulating this consensus that we have to hold hands with Trudeau and Ford and do the war dance, against our greatest, ally and trade partner. It's ludicrous.
It truly is ludicrous. And what kind of vote is required in that referendum? Is it a 2/3 vote is required to pass?
No, 50% plus one, a clear majority.
No shit. Wow. Okay. So a referendum,
and that's what I say. When everybody, I have a friend of mine was saying, "Oh yeah, well, support for independence in Alberta is only at 20%." I said, "Okay, well, let's pretend that's true, right? Obviously, we think that it's much higher than that. Even if it's 20%, that's 1 million people. Like our population's and at that point, that's a movement. Like this isn't a bunch of fringe radicals standing out at the pastures screaming, "I want to be free," about their cows. You know what I mean? Like this isn't a bunch of people out in the pastures, screaming at their livestock. This is like 20 million. This is like 1 million Albertans at minimum, 20% from every single walk of life in the province. From tradespeople to servers to people that work in the food and beverage industry to you name it. I mean, that's across the province. And when you explain to people, like you sit down and have a rational discussion with people about what Canada is costing them, right, and what that their little Canadian passport is worth to them, or is costing them, they go, "Oh, I didn't know that. Oh my God, really?" And then, and this is, like I would imagine there's a good number of Albertans who go, "Oh, I don't have to go through customs to go to Las Vegas or Arizona or Palm Springs anymore. Oh, where do I sign?"
Yeah.
I mean, there are just so many advantages to not being part of Canada anymore that, it's still, beggars belief that we have people in Alberta that are, that have not got or have not spent time seriously thinking about the advantages of Alberta independence.
Well, I mean, last time I checked, it's like 8 million or so that have seen your blurb. And then that's just that. You've got big figures in the United States that are close to the presidency, not only Elon Musk, but Charlie Kirk's. And some people are declaring that you should be the governor of Alberta already, I saw online. But like I've seen no negative response from the United States. I've seen a clear positive response from people that are in Alberta. If the lowest estimate is 1 million and you really only need 51%, which news to me, that's incredible. And I don't think it's anything but achievable. I really do actually.
Well, no, and I'm telling you, that's why our politicians are not jumping up and down to actually, because I mean, the premier could call a referendum tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I think she should call one 6 months from now and phone President Trump. He'll take her call. I know he'll take her call, right? And say, "Hey, President Trump, not Donald, President Trump, right? this is where we're at. We really want to explore the benefits of Alberta independence and joining the U.S. either as potentially as a territory or as a state. We need to be able to do this in a calm environment. On my word that we're going to have a referendum in 6 months, on the issue to take the first step towards Alberta independence. Can you please, release Alberta from the tariffs that have been imposed because of your displeasure with the government in Ottawa?
Yeah.
And your displeasure and your rightful displeasure with the government in Queen's Park and Toronto,
Yeah.
right? And who both of which are manipulating a trade war, for their own electoral purposes.
Without question.
Right.
Who calls an election in the middle of February? It's ridiculous.
Well, this is just like Trudeau, calling the August election in 2021 in the middle of COVID when he still had 2 years left on his mandate.
And with the Winnipeg Labs, that's also to cover up a Winnipeg Lab leak too. Which
no, and then on top of it, like something that everybody forgets about. And again, my friend Colonel Redmond disagrees with me on this point because he says, "Oh, come on, Jeff, the Canadian Armed Forces, PSYOPs command, is like 6 people and they can't really do anything." But Trudeau, in fact, unleashed the PSYOPs command onto Canadian citizens by having them get involved in COVID messaging. Right. So we literally, and this is, a lot of people suspect that the reason that we were going through chiefs of defense staff so quick was that they're having trouble finding a chief of defense staff that could stomach the idea of having the Canadian military PSYOPs command turned on the Canadian people before a federal election. Right.
Yeah.
Those are all facts. They're not very widely reported. Nobody ever talks about it. But these are all very, very troubling, very troubling things. What's the Canadian military doing helping the Trudeau government with its COVID messaging?
Yeah, I didn't know they were.
Right? Oh yeah, no, and again, my friend Colonel Redmond, who knows a lot more about these things than I do, thinks that whatever they did was negligible. But there's a lot of people that think that the attacks on the character of various Canadian generals that led to these so-called sexual harassment scandals or whatever were cooked up because these people were digging their heels in and saying, no, you're not going to use the Canadian military to brainwash the Canadian people to help you get elected. That's not what we're here for. Right.
You judge a tree by its fruits, and that's clearly what it has bared, right? With all the people getting kicked out of that position. That's really concerning, actually. It makes sense when you try to reflect on that time that's likely what was going on, given everything that occurred. That is scary and shocking. Kind of bringing us back a little bit to referendum, to Alberta independence. Has anyone from the Premier's office in any way, shape, or form reached out to you and talked to you?
I'm not going to comment on any private discussions that I have with anybody at any level of government at this point. This whole topic is so loaded, and that's why we haven't disclosed the names of the people on our steering committee and that are going to be part of the delegation to Washington at this point. For good or ill, I'm prepared to stick my neck out and act as a lightning rod on this thing for now. But there's again, retired MPs, sitting MLAs. There's all kinds of people in and around the government that support what we're doing, right? And as to what the Premier thinks about what we're doing, I really could only guess.
I meant more so that whether or not the whole idea has been ignored or not, but I won't press on any further. People can.
Oh, I can't imagine it's being ignored. It's certainly being talked about, and it's certainly, I think it's certainly all of those people that have a vested interest in the status quo are obviously very concerned, about the fact that this is rattling the status quo, right?
That's about as rattling of the status quo as you can get.
Yeah, no, that's it. So anyway,
real quick before I let you go, just. You have a position professionally, which kind of gives you a better perspective to comment on it. And you did touch upon it a little bit, but the legal requirements, just a referendum, Like, what else is,
Well,
let's
no,
say
I
everything
mean,
goes well. What's that process?
there's a real question as to whether or not the so-called Clarity Act that was brought in by Jean Chrétien, in and around the last Quebec referendum, is even legal, right, or constitutional, right?
Right.
But that having been said, we have the Quebec secession reference, and clearly, what we have is the guidance is a clear vote on a clear question. The Clarity Act claims that the Parliament of Canada has the right to decide whether or not the question is fair and clear or not. I think that's open to some debate, and to the extent that the Parliament of Canada decided to drag its feet and not approve a question or allow a referendum to go ahead, I think would be something of a problem. That's literally the first step.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to remember is that under the rules under international law are different than under Canadian domestic law, and as an example, Kosovo made a unilateral declaration of independence. I think even absent a referendum, and Canada was one of the first countries to recognize it. Right.
Okay.
So if Ottawa, like hypothetically, if Ottawa wasn't going to approve a referendum question under the Clarity Act, Alberta went ahead and had the vote anyway, and a majority of Albertans voted in favor, and the United States chose to recognize the independent Republic of Alberta as a first step. I'm not sure what Canada would say or could say.
What we could do. What are we gonna?
Yeah, it's obviously a question of some nicety at that point.
Yeah, I mean, our military's got what, 3 days worth of munitions.
Well, we're not going there, and I'm not.
No, of course.
Get into that type of discussion. This is not a violent process.
No.
This is a democratic process, and everything is going to unroll peacefully, and as it should under Canadian, both Canadian federal law and what could end up being laws passed by the Alberta legislature to help guide this process. So let's all of this is going to be done in an appropriate, lawful manner. There's
been no indications otherwise.
We have to deal with all of these things in a responsible manner. So that's what we're doing.
Do you think there's anything that we missed in this discussion? I mean, it's pretty extensive.
Oh God, how could we have? I think we were all over the map today. So, but anyway, it's been a long day. So thank you for that. It was a really nice discussion. So thanks for having me on.
It was a pleasure to speak with you. And frankly, Governor Rath has a damn good ring to it.
Oh, just stop it. It's if I can help achieve Alberta independence, and if Alberta becomes independent, I don't need to be the leader. I'll happily follow George Washington's example, and the example of Cincinnatus, and happily retired on my farm with my with my horses and my family. So
what a beautiful way to punctuate this interview.
Anyway, you have a good day, and we'll talk later on.
Sir, it's a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, bye.
Bye.